Hey, welcome back to KP Unpacked. Now, if you've been following along, maybe via audio or maybe you check it out on YouTube, you see the video clips on LinkedIn or somewhere like that. This episode is going to look a little bit different than others that you've seen. We're rolling out another version of KP Unpacked these days. Normally, I'm joined by KP Ready, the CEO and founder of Shadow Ventures and of KP Ready Company. And the shtick is right. The format is that we take one of KP's LinkedIn posts and we unpack it. It's my opportunity every week to say, "Hey KP, what were you thinking when you wrote that?" That's a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it's my opportunity to ask KP what the inspiration was behind what he posted on LinkedIn. If you're not following KP on LinkedIn, you need to be. Just go to KP Reddy, REDDY. Find him on LinkedIn. He posts several times a day, usually. A lot of great insights from around the AEC industry, the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. A lot of insights around investing, a lot of insights around startups and innovation for the built environment. Um, Many of those are insights that you won't hear anywhere else. Many of those are meant to be pot stirring insights. They might be a little bit binary. I'm going to ask today's guest about that maybe a little bit here. And as I alluded to, I am joined by someone today other than KP Ready. My name is Jeff Eccles. I'm a senior advisor at KP Ready Company, and I host our podcasts and our live and virtual events. And again, this is my opportunity to unpack KP's brain. Today, I am joined by Zig Rubel, FAIA. Now, I don't know if Zig's going to kind of chuckle at that because we talked about this in the background. But one of the things that I'm really looking forward to about this conversation that we're about to have is that Zig still practices architecture. My background is architecture, and KP's post that we're going to talk about starts with "I'm not an architect." So KP's not here in the room to defend himself. Zig and I are going to go at it about KP's post, but I think it's a really good topic that deserves to be unpacked, and it's something that is historically discussed throughout not only academia but throughout the profession. So I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation with Zig. Zig, welcome. I'm glad you're joining me here today, and we'll see where this conversation goes.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. So you are the co-founder and the CEO of Foresight Digital. You're also still practicing as an architect. And I mentioned at the beginning that you are FAIA, which is you're a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. So why don't we just real briefly, for anybody that doesn't understand what that means, what is someone that carries those letters after their name? What does that mean?
Sure. So if someone is quote unquote checking me after this is made, I have to put my disclaimer. But AIA stands for the American Institute of Architects. And not everyone knows this, but architects are licensed by the state. And not everyone who is a licensed architect joins the AIA. So about half architects are not AIA members, and the other half are AIA members. And the F per se stands for fellowship. And what it essentially connotates is that it's a AIA member who has practiced as an AIA member for at least 10 years or more and has given back and made a contribution with what they call the ripple effect, meaning you haven't just practiced in the Bay Area where I live now in San Francisco, but there has been somewhat of a national impact based on the area of what the AIA calls of elevation. So the first fellowship area is design, practice, which is what I was elevated in. And now I'll probably get a little bit wobbly, but contribution to the AIA organization, volunteering, and other teaching, I think, is now one. So if you've made an impact in the profession, then you get elevated. And again, don't quote me on this, but I think only 2 or 3% of AIA members are fellows.
Yeah,
So
I think that is pretty accurate. Um, and thank you for unpacking that, because I think that sets up the framing of this conversation pretty well. You were elevated um, because of the area of practice.
right.
You're still practicing. My background is architecture.
Mhm.
I haven't worked in an architecture or AE firm for quite a few years now, but I still teach pro practice. So both of us have a point of view and historical knowledge about this
Mhm.
idea of the architect as master builder. So that's maybe a little bit of framework around us unpacking this post that KP wrote on LinkedIn. So I'm going to read the post,
Mhm.
and then we can talk about it. And if you're following along at home, maybe you're listening to this in the year 2027. I don't know. Um, if you want to find this post, look back to looks like about January 27th, 2025, and you can find this post on KP's profile. But it goes like this: I'm not an architect, but why did they lose the master builder position, and why have they never taken it back? That, for those that are keeping statistics, that is in fact one of KP's shortest LinkedIn posts ever. But just one sentence, one question: why did architects lose the position of master builder, and why have they not taken it back? Now, there's a lot. Right? It seems short, but I think there's a lot to unpack there. So where should we start this conversation?
So since we're both from the architectural kind of birthplace, I would ask you, did architects ever have the position of master builder?
Not in the memory of anybody that is an architect right now.
Well, I think we need to speak to Mr. KP about that. However, I would agree with you. I don't know if it was ours to lose, but certainly ours to gain is the way I would characterize it.
Hmm.
And when I was asked to maybe be on this unpacking, I went to go see, well, what is a master builder? I mean, what does Merriam-Webster say
Okay.
is a master builder? Because KP's opinion of what a master builder is different than probably what your or I uh, definition is. And according to Merriam-Webster's definition, it's someone who is skilled in the craft of building,
Right.
right? So I think you and I were trained in
Hmm.
the craft of building, but are we quote unquote skilled and gifted in it? And I would say absolutely not.
Right.
I do play weekend warrior on my house, doing home repair, but I would never take it outside of my house because I wouldn't want to be laughed at, so to speak. In quote unquote putting a building together. So I'm not sure if the quote unquote architectural um, aspiration comes with wanting to be a builder as opposed to wanting to be someone who effectuates and inspires building is the way I would characterize it. How do you feel?
Well, I think I agree with that, and it's I'm like you. I worked a lot of construction jobs through high school and excuse me, through high school and college, but still, right, not a builder, right? I'm not skilled in that. I do think that there are plenty of people inside the profession, and maybe this is part of KP's point as well, but there are plenty of people inside the profession that bemoan the fact that the profession has let go of some of the autonomy and responsibilities of of the position of architect. Um, and I think that and I think that there are some that are still working somewhere in the realm of what a lot of people are thinking about in terms of master builder. They're doing architect as developer. They're doing things like construction management, other things where they maybe they have a broader scope than, we've got to put this in quotes definitely, but just designing. But I think when I hear people bemoaning the fact that architects lost the master builder position, as KP said it, I think today they're talking about losing certain decision making, certain I'm struggling to find a word. The decision making, the ability to control certain things that maybe contractors are controlling today. But I think a lot of that goes back to our fear of risk. Right? I think a lot of that goes back to the risk managers.
So let's talk about that for a second. So the word I would use is gravitas.
Okay.
Has the architect lost their gravitas on certain decision making? And I would say absolutely not. So my area of practice is healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and probably not the most complicated building type, but it's certainly a complicated building type.
It's very complicated.
And I wouldn't say that my area of influence as an architect has been contained. However, I would say that I know my swim lane and I
Right.
know where I can add value. With that, when I saw the question, there are a lot of architects that are master builders for, let's say, homes.
Mm-hmm.
There are a
Right.
lot of people that's a one-stop shop that design and build a home. And you probably know that almost every state in the land, you don't need a licensed architect for a residential building that's 2 stories or less and is 4 units or less. So, and that's how most um, builders operate, building homes. But for the architects that are quote unquote both the architect and the builder, it gives them a lot of autonomy to make all of those decisions. As the building gets more complex, most people realize that they need to partner and enlarge their tent, if you will, with knowledge and get more people into the tent. So then is the architect the master builder or the conductor of the orchestra, since we're using analogies?
Sure. Absolutely. I know one of the things that KP talks about quite a bit is the role of specialization, right?
Right.
And the healthcare design is a great example, right? I mean,
Sure.
um, I I would say that um, most owners of healthcare systems are not turning to residential architects or um, architects who are sort of general practitioners to design their healthcare facilities, whether it's a hospital or you
Mhm.
know any other variety of healthcare. Right? They're going to specialists or
Sure.
firms that specialize in healthcare design. But one of the things that KP will talk about is that he thinks that as technologies advance, the use of AI, et cetera, that it's easier to capture specialization that you don't have. Essentially, I think that's accurate. Um, hey, I can use AI to close that specialization gap, and I wonder, because I think that's part of what he's poking at here in his question
Mhm.
is there some sort of scenario where an architect or an engineer or a a contractor or whomever is able to rein in. Things are fairly siloed these days, I would say.
Mhm.
We've got an architect, we've got a mechanical engineer, we've got a structural engineer, we've got a construction manager, we've got an owner's rep, we've got the GC. You know, there are silos and swim lanes, as you uh,
Mhm.
said earlier. I wonder if part of his thinking is, well, with the technologies that we're developing, the technologies that we have at hand, is it easier to rein in some of these specializations and remove some of the silos, or maybe even gather up some of the silos? You know, I'm going to wrap my arm around, or my arms around, these 6 silos that I didn't used to be able to get into. And now with the use of technology, does that give me a way to expand my scope?
So that's a far-reaching question.
It
And
is.
this is how I would respond to it. So a lot of people believe AI is going to be doing everything. And in some respects, theoretically, they're correct. And it might have been 6 or 8 months ago, I went to the California Architects Board saying that the Architects Board needs to take a position on technology and architecture because ultimately it's that body, the licensing board, that's protecting the health, safety, and welfare um, of buildings. And I ended the talk by saying, while AI is not going away, AI still needs adult supervision.
Right.
And that's kind of where I want to tie it back to your question, which is AI will do all of these amazing things and have all of this knowledge. However, AI is not going to be able to determine what the best pattern match is for the solution given the situation.
Right.
That that has to be a human. Now, can the architect or some other professional be that decision maker? Possibly, but I think that's really going to get tied to the human and not necessarily the profession.
Do you think, as we look again, a lot of silos,
Right.
um, as we look into the future, and AI is the elephant in the room, but as we look into the future, do you see a scenario where, because I think there are a lot of people that look at AI from a point of view of fear and say, oh, AI is going to do everything. AI is going to eliminate architects. AI is going to take my job. Whatever version of fear-based statement they have. But as we look out into the future with the development of these technologies, do you see a scenario where some of those silos could be broken down, that professionals, architects, and others could utilize the technology to expand the scope of their services?
Absolutely. In a former life, I had a saying: "Tools for the mundane, the mind for creativity."
Mm.
So AI is going to focus on the mundane knowledge that every professional needs. I think we're still a ways away for technology to be what some people are calling general artificial intelligence, or thinking about problems creatively. I think that's still currently in the human realm and probably will be, I'm hoping, forever. And I think that is where I'm focused on. And I don't think architects or builders or engineers are ever going to go away, but we have to become more efficient and more valuable in how we contribute to the built environment.
One of the things that comes up, and I've been reading through some of the comments on KP's post here, and I mentioned it earlier. It's come up in some of these comments, but um, there are a lot of people that talk about the sort of the shrinking of the scope of what an architect does, what an architect's responsible for, what an architect should do, et cetera. They blame it on risk management, um, fear of liability, et cetera. Do you think, and if anybody missed this at the beginning of our conversation here, Zig is not only a practicing architect, but he's the CEO and co-founder of Foresight Digital. So there, you're maybe you're straddling the fence. I don't know how you describe that or how you think about it, but you have a little bit of a unique perspective
Right.
in this realm. Do you see a scenario where, again, it's AI or whatever the emerging technologies are that we're talking about?
Mhm.
Do you see a scenario where some of those tools will reduce the liability, or somehow, maybe not even reduce, but somehow affect the way that we think about liability in the work that we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you can look at it in two different extremes, right? One extreme is where there's a software solution that can check for every possible configuration outcome of a design and building. And should something fail, is the designer or builder at fault? Or is the AI code writer at fault? So that's one extreme. The other extreme, and what makes me excited to do what I'm doing, which is AI allows me to focus on different problems. So I often say that I've never worked on a healthcare project that we weren't remodeling before it was open. And it's probably because healthcare buildings are complex to build and healthcare is changing all the time. So, what if we had a tool to help healthcare projects teams figure out where that needle is going so that buildings could be more resilient and change over time as healthcare needs are are going? Um, so I would rather work with a technology that could help me as opposed to knowing that I'm right in what I've done, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and so we opened with the definition that you shared from Merriam-Webster.
Right.
So does based on what you just said, I mean, have we come full circle now, right? What you're talking about, and having the knowledge that what you've done is right, and um, I think some of the things that I've run down in my mind are you know, things like code review, um,
Mhm.
permitting. There's
Right.
all kinds of, you mentioned the mundane. I remember the days of doing code checks and code reviews on our projects, and submissions for here in Indiana, it would be at the state, um, and permitting at the local jurisdiction, but all of that
I
mundane.
mean, Jeff, you're old enough to remember stippling concrete on details.
I
That
am.
is my
That KP likes to point out that I'm the oldest guy in the room. Maybe I still am the oldest guy in the room. Yes,
yeah,
I am old enough to remember using a pencil to
right.
draw, um, with the tools that we have at hand now.
Right.
Maybe not pencils, but AI, et cetera. Do they, coming back to the Merriam-Webster definition, do they allow us to have better knowledge? You mentioned resilience
Right.
a minute ago, which is a huge, and it's going to be a bigger topic, um, I believe, with hurricanes flooding Asheville, North Carolina, and the
Yep.
state of California on
Mhm.
fire, and right,
Yep.
we're past the tipping point. Um,
Right.
is is the use of these tools that we're talking about going to make us more knowledgeable, more valuable in understanding how buildings are built, how they should be built, how to respond? Lord knows building codes are going to change after the last 12 months of climate
Yeah.
disasters. Um,
Yeah.
what's AI? What impact is AI or any technology going to have in terms of architects changing the way that they learn, they operate, they check, they maybe attempt to take over more scope?
Yes, I want to give you two different answers. One is, so we're absolutely going to be solving different sets of problems,
Hmm.
right? So one of the outcomes from Hurricane Katrina, which mind you was a while ago,
Right.
that came into healthcare was that there was a hospital that was without power for 3 days.
Okay.
So not many people know this, but in California, hospitals need to be completely off the grid for 3 days. So they need to not
Right.
only have generator fuel for 3 days, but they need to have potable water stored up and the ability to have non-potable water um, discharged into tanks for 3 days because no one knows when a bridge or road is going to be out for 3 days. So now, because of that, it's now 4 days. So getting back to these horrible fires and other events that have happened, there are going to be more requirements that are going to be put on buildings. I don't know if you saw in the news, but there have been a couple of homes that were built very resiliently with materials and deeper walls and other
Mhm.
well-designed solutions. And then the question now is, will resilient home designs become more of a requirement or more of a nice to have outcome from these climate disasters? I don't know, because I wanted to touch on the other thing about AI. So a lot of the comments had to do with reducing risk, knowledge. I thought the one that was pretty funny was, well, when architects were master builders, there were a lot more deaths in buildings, and now that architects aren't doing, there's less deaths. Which I know they were probably being tongue in cheek, but I thought that one was pretty funny. But the other factor is price. Owners want to spend as little as possible as they can for designing their facility. And one of the projects in my career was working on, well, Sprint doesn't exist anymore, but Sprint's world headquarters, which was designed and built in Overland Park, Kansas. And the owner's position was, you guys are designing and building 4 million square feet. It's fairly repetitive. I'm not giving you your standard 10% fee or whatever it was at that
Right.
time. They wanted to drive the price down. So unfortunately for architects, architects are going to have to address the client's wish to be competitive and differentiate, but at the same time, they don't want the quality to go down with a lower price. And I think AI is going to facilitate having the quality go up and the costs go down in that process.
Yeah, we hosted an event in Miami towards the end of last year. It was called an executive briefing. We'll
Mhm.
have some more of those executive briefings this year, and what you just said could have very nearly been a quote from an owner. So one of the things that was unique about the executive briefing was we had architects in the room, engineers in the room, contractors in the room, owners in the
Mhm.
room, operators in the room. So you sort of had the circular economy, if you will. Um,
Sweet.
yeah, it was everybody, and one of the one of the speakers from the owner side said almost the same thing that you just said, right? Telling me that you're using AI tools is not a value proposition, right? This is what we expect. Right? We expect that you're using the best tools. We expect that you're using the best technology that you can get your hands on to do this. We're not going to pay you more because you have this.
Yeah.
We do expect it to be delivered faster, cheaper, et cetera. But at the same time, and this was this is from the owner's mouth. We want you to make money, right? We need you to make money. We need you to have a healthy business because we need you to stay in business,
Right.
to be able to continue to serve us. So you better figure it out was part of the message there, right? We've been talking about this post, obviously, that on KP Reddy's LinkedIn profile. He says, I'm not an architect, but why did they lose the master builder position? Why have they never taken it back? We probably have a little bit of disagreement with KP and what exactly master builder means. And Merriam-Webster certainly does, right? There's no way,
Right.
if we had KP in the room right now, he's going to go, no, that's not it. that's not what a master builder is. And to be fair, I think there are a number of folks around the profession who would also disagree with that. But all of that being said, here we are. It's 2025. It's January, as we're recording this, and we're hearing all kinds of news about AI, different AI. We're using AI. In my pro practice classes, different speakers have come in and talked a lot about how the profession has changed over the last 100 years or so. Is there anything that you see as we look out towards the future, with all the emerging technology ahead of us? Is there anything that makes you think or even wish that we would go back and regain some of those things that we have quote unquote lost over the years?
Yeah, no, that's I'm so glad that you asked that question. So I struggle with the fact that all of us are living longer
Yeah.
and we're designing buildings that are going to last more than 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're built today and they're going to be here in 2100 or maybe even 2200, but I definitely won't, and I'm not planning on being around in 2200. However, going back to the architect's role and opportunity, I think our opportunity is creating a new value network with the data that the buildings create and giving life to what building data really means. So, Jeff, not to kind of poo-poo on our age, but you probably remember that architects used to keep all the drawings of the building in their offices. And
Right.
if the client wanted to make a renovation, they go to the architect and say, hey, we're thinking about blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And they, go to their flat file, pull out the drawer. So, well, what if the architect became that repository of all of their data and could provide value to what some of those business decisions need to be for the owner to decide, oh yeah, maybe I can do that here, or maybe I need a whole new building, so forth and so on. So I think that is really the opportunity for quote unquote building architects to become the master builder with data for the building life cycle, is how I would answer the question.
That I find super fascinating. Right. Maybe, tongue in cheek, maybe architect as librarian or architect as management consultant
Right,
versus architect as
right.
developer. Right. But I think that's a really great point. Right. The amount of, I don't know how many people I take this for granted. I don't know if you take it for granted, but the amount of work and research and, um, fact finding and creativity and everything that goes into a project. We used to have binders, right? Here's the
Yep.
binders with all the spec sheets and all the cut sheets and materials and all the iterations of the schematic designs and feasibility studies, all of it, right? We had that was on paper, and
Mm-hmm.
to your point, flat files. Here's a quick story. When I did my internship here in Indianapolis, it was during the Mike Tyson trial. When Mike Tyson was on trial, you can Google it
Mm-hmm.
if you want to know more about it. But Mike Tyson was on trial. The jury was sequestered in the Indianapolis Athletic Club right downtown on Meridian Street. And there was a fire that broke out in the Indianapolis Athletic Club. It was an historic building, right, and pretty close to the center of downtown. The firm that I worked for was engaged to save and renovate and rebuild
Mm-hmm.
the athletic club. I worked on that
Mm-hmm.
project.
Hmm.
We had the linen drawings, right? And for those of you out there that are using Revit or some BIM program, Google drawings on linen so that you can understand what we're talking about here. But that somebody, right? Somebody had those in their archive, right? In their flat files, they had those. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we are right that we are so much more advanced than that now. All of the information, whether it's the environmental information, the operational information,
Right.
materials, everything else. I do find that fascinating that if the architect is indeed the conductor of the orchestra, they could
Right.
indeed be the librarian or the whoever whatever title we give that, because that is valuable. Um,
Yeah.
i-
Yeah.
in many project types, maybe not all, but many project types certainly.
I think in all project types, because
Okay.
buildings as we know them are going to change. So we're seeing that we don't need as many garages,
Hmm.
right? I mean, as simple of a building type as there is. And these garages are now becoming, some are becoming office buildings, some might become homes, some might become, I don't know, something else. So every building could be quote unquote something else. And I think design professionals need to start thinking outside of the box because we don't need so many buildings in the US. Elsewhere in the world, like Nigeria, where the population is just exploding, we need more buildings. But in the US, we're really population growth is largely becoming, we're all living longer. And
Hmm.
that, which is a whole nother topic to unpack, but we'll just leave it at that.
Right.
But I think the term architect needs to encompass the life of the building, and the master builder is an opportunity for a design professional to become that person and regain that quote unquote gravitas within the built environment.
Okay. So I think that's where we've come to, right? We've got a new definition of what master builder may be as we look into the future, and and new roles that architects could play, um, in relation to not only that term, but in the built environment. I like that. I like the fact that we can look at this in a way that says, hey, it may not be the design architect or the building architect in the way that we thought about it, but here's a new value proposition. Here's a new way, which to me, as you're describing it, that feels right. Right, it fits.
Mhm.
This is what we do. This is what we know. This is how we can help, and and I think it also fits really well with the idea of resiliency, right? This
Right.
idea that we don't have to keep building. We arguably shouldn't keep building. We should look at adaptability and resilience, and say, last night I was driving home from the gym that I go to, and there's this whole section of this area that was dark, right? That's not
Hmm.
occupied. Well, hey, if we've got a housing crisis, there's a whole bunch of square footage that maybe we could do something with that. As
Yeah.
just a really completely
Right.
oversimplified example, but yeah, I am interested in this idea that the master builder role could be something completely different than either the way Merriam-Webster has described it or
Right.
the way that KP Reddy is thinking about it.
So can we fairly say that KP, his thought about the question might be dated and he needs to rethink it in a future way?
Since he is not in the room to defend himself, then I'm going to say yes, we can. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to your point, again, I brought up the fact that there are many in the profession that would agree
Sure.
with his statement. And, if you go to his post, um, there are a number of comments under his post that sort of agree with that. Um, but one of the things that I would say, I say this to my students, I say this to firms that I consult or have consulted with, is
Hmm.
some of these things, it's just the ship has sailed, right? Are you going to be Leonardo da Vinci, or are you going to be the architect who was also on site directing the masons as the cathedral was being built? The answer is no. There's not a scenario where that romanticized ideal of master builder, if that's the one that you had in your head, that there's not a scenario where that's going to be a thing. Are you driving the 3D printer to 3D print the cathedral or something like that? I don't know, but I think more likely what the scenario that you just laid out is that's more likely a future facing scenario than what some folks have in their mind as, oh, architects need to take master builder back.
Well, they definitely need to do something because, and that's all I'm going to say about that. They definitely need to um, reinvent themselves, and that's what I'm trying to do with foresight. I'm not selling it. I'm just saying that we have a responsibility to be more responsible for the built environment, and whether it's becoming a master builder or better designer or data librarian for buildings, we definitely need to do something.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thread of a theme that runs through a lot of these discussions that we have. Is, here we are, right? As you look
Yeah.
into the future, whatever the technology is that we're talking about, whatever the use cases or the business models that we're talking about, things are changing, right? And
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
always changing, but they're accelerating now. They at a pace that's more rapid than it ever has been before. And so the idea that you're going to hang on to the way that it always was, that's the losing proposition. So I think you're exactly right. It's not just architects, it's engineers, it's contractors, it's other in the built environment. But you're right. We've got to rethink. We've got to do some things differently and reimagine what some of these roles really are.
Right. And I'm sure you've heard the expression, no one has gotten fired for buying IBM.
Right.
So is the client going to hire an architect as a master builder because they're not IBM?
Well, well, so that's also a great point, right? Because
Yeah.
when we think about the value of an architect, and I
Mhm.
I speak and consult on the idea of commoditization
Sure.
and um, and decommoditization. And one of the fallacies that a lot of people and again, this isn't just architects, but since that's often my audience, one mistake a lot of people think is that we actually define the value proposition, right? And if the client looks at our value proposition and says, yeah, I don't see it. I don't see the value there. Then that in fact is not right. They get to decide what's value and what's not value. And so
Yeah.
as much as we'd like to take the reins, and need to take the reins at the end of the day, and we also focus on this in our incubator at KP Redico. Our incubator is focused squarely on customer, we call it customer discovery. Architects would maybe call it client discovery, but a big part of customer discovery is understanding what the customers actually value, whether it's what we said or not, right? If we say this is what the value is and nobody agrees, guess what? We're the ones that are wrong.
Absolutely.
All right. If somehow you have jumped into this conversation right at the very end, I don't know how you did that. You hit fast forward all the way through. I am here today on KP Unpacked with Zig Rubel, FAIA. Got to go back to the beginning and hear the explanation of FAIA. We have been unpacking one of KP Reddy's LinkedIn posts. And if you aren't following KP on LinkedIn, you should be. He posts several times a day. Great insights around the built environment, around the AEC world. They're often meant to be pot stirring. I think KP would agree with that. They are often meant to push the envelope, and I don't think this one is any different. It goes like this. I'm not an architect, but why did they lose the master builder position, and why have they never taken it back? Zig and I have spent the last 45 minutes unpacking this. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. Zig will be back. We may unpack another one of KP's posts. We may continue this conversation. I don't know. But you're going to see more and more guests like Zig here on KP Unpacked so that we can get different perspectives from all around the built environment on some of these things that KP's talking about. So Zig, thank you very much for joining me for this conversation today. It was fascinating. You brought a great perspective from a lot of experience in the architecture world, a lot of experience from the profession, and appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and happy to be back.
Absolutely, thanks. We'll get another one lined up here, and maybe we'll just continue this one because there's still a lot to unpack here. So thanks for that.
Sure.
All right. And thanks to all of you out there for listening or watching whichever version of KP Unpacked that you're consuming right now. We appreciate you. Thank you for following us and following along here. And we'll be back again next week with another KP Unpacked. The question will be, will it be me and KP or will it be me and somebody else? Somebody is going to unpack one of KP's posts here. So thank you. We'll be back again next week. Until then, take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.